Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping back in time to examine what is essentially a historical blueprint for running a state. We're going to unpack some really profound ideas about authority, law, and society, framing our journey as a true wise man's guide to governance. We're looking at centuries-old wisdom here, but as we dive deep into how a civilization is actually built and maintained, you might just find that the mechanics of power and duty haven't changed nearly as much as we like to think. Let's get into it. Okay, so let's anchor ourselves right away to our source material. We're looking at a landmark work by the historical wise man and renowned jurist Abul Hassan al-Mawardi. If you are looking to understand the historical mechanisms of power and law in the Islamic world, well, this text is basically ground zero. And what's really crucial to understand here is that this wasn't just some philosophical musing for scholars sitting up in an ivory tower. No, this was a highly practical, urgent survival manual. It was meant for actual rulers and administrators to understand exactly how a sprawling, incredibly complex realm should be structured, governed, and methodically maintained so it doesn't just collapse under its own weight. To truly grasp what Mawardi is teaching us as our guide, we have to start with the title itself, Al-Ahkam as-Sultaniyah. It's a fascinating compound phrase. Al-Ahkam translates to the laws, the rulings, or the decrees. It represents the strict, unyielding legal framework of a society. The second part, as-Sultaniyah, refers to the sovereign power, the actual dynamic governance and physical authority that holds a realm together. So when we study this text, we are exploring that incredibly fragile, often turbulent intersection where the strict rule of law meets the very real, often unpredictable nature of sovereign power. Now take a close look at the publisher mark right here, Kalam Law. Translated, this means the word of Allah. This tiny detail is actually a massive deal because it grounds all of these administrative rules in a foundational divine origin. Mawardi wasn't just inventing a system of government out of thin air or just copying neighboring empires. He was painstakingly deriving these administrative laws directly from divine scripture and prophetic tradition. That means the stakes for getting this right, both for the ruler in the palace and the citizen in the streets, were viewed as absolute. It wasn't just about avoiding a rebellion. It was about upholding a sacred duty. Think of this agenda as our map of the realm for today's journey. We'll uncover the core principles of governance, move into the essential legal duties, and then pivot to the most vital part of our explainer, the enduring social contract between the ruler's heavy burden and the subject's righteous path. Let's kick off our mentor's journey with Section 1, Core Principles of Governance, the architecture of the realm. Deriving straight from al-Mawardi's title, the core governance principles are twofold, and they are completely 100% interdependent. First, you have establishing the ahkam, the laws. But look, a law is literally just ink on a page without the second pillar, maintaining sultaniyah, the sovereign authority to actually back it up. Think about this like a wise man building a great hall. A society with beautiful, just laws, but absolutely no sovereign power to enforce them, it quickly descends into chaos. The roof caves in. But on the flip side, a society with absolute sovereign power but no foundational law breeds pure tyranny. The walls crush everyone inside. You absolutely cannot have a stable realm without both. They are the twin pillars holding up the entire state. So how does that actually work in practice? That brings us to Section 2, Essential Legal Duties, the Mechanics of the State. The crucial point from our wise man here is that theoretical authority without actual physical execution is completely meaningless. To transform these rules into a functioning administration, he outlines 3 essential step-by-step legal duties. First, the leadership must acknowledge the laws, publicly recognizing their supreme origin and binding themselves to it. Second, they have to actively implement the governance. This isn't a passive thing. We're talking about building the courts, appointing the judges, collecting taxes, securing borders. It requires massive action. And third, they must perpetually uphold al-Ahkam as-Sultaniyah. They have to actively maintain that delicate balance between the law and the power, day in and day out. It is a relentless, ongoing process of maintenance that simply never sleeps. Now we pivot to Section 3, the enduring social contract and the balance of power, where we focus on the people who actually make up the realm. Consider this piece of ancient wisdom. The laws of Islamic governance are not just rigid codes written on a dusty page. They form a living, breathing social contract. Governance isn't just something that happens to a passive population. It is this profound, dynamic relationship between two groups. It requires a delicate, constantly maintained balance between the tremendous, almost soul-crushing burden placed on the shoulders of the authority and the fundamental, grounding duty of obedience required from the populace. One literally cannot exist without the other. So let's break down both sides of this really powerful equation.
Let's start at the very top with Section 4, the ruler's heavy burden, authority, and responsibility.
I really want you to consider the immense burden of the ruler in this historical context. In Mawardi's framework, sitting on the throne is absolutely not a prize to be won. It's not an excuse for self-enrichment or tyranny. It is a strict, demanding, and frankly terrifying legal mandate. The ruler is ultimately fundamentally responsible for upholding all of calm over the entire realm. This means guaranteeing justice, protecting the absolute most vulnerable people in society, and maintaining the stability of the state against internal and external threats. If a ruler fails in this mandate, they aren't just failing their political ambitions. They are failing a sacred, foundational duty. It's a heavy, monumental burden designed intentionally by the wise man to keep sovereign power fully grounded and in check.
But, as they say, a ruler cannot govern an empty room. This brings us to Section 5, the subject's righteous path, duty, and obedience.
As a subject within this historical framework, your role isn't just passive existence. You're expected to follow a righteous path that literally provides the foundation for the entire society to function. This involves two core directives from our guide. First, adhering to the laws, conducting your business honestly, living your life according to the established framework, resolving your disputes through proper channels. And second, actively supporting the governance. This means participating economically, maintaining social harmony, and offering the collective defense and obedience that actually allows the administration to do its job. Because without the subjects actively holding up their end of this bargain, the ruler's authority completely evaporates.
And this brilliantly illustrates the ultimate takeaway of our guide today. Look at this balance. You have the ruler on one side, whose absolute duty is to enforce and protect the laws, bearing the weight of the entire state. On the other side, you have the subject, whose fundamental duty is to live under and actively support those exact same laws. They are two vastly different roles with vastly different levels of day-to-day power, yet they are permanently bound together by the exact same legal framework. In this ancient design, the ruler is not above the law, and the subject is not outside of it. They're locked in a mutual, codependent contract of rights and responsibilities that keeps the whole civilization alive.
As we close out this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We've just unpacked this centuries-old guide to statecraft, walking through the very architecture of a historical empire. But as you consider this dynamic between the heavy, exacting burden of leadership and the vital, active participation of the public, ask yourself, how much does Al-Mawardi's ancient wisdom on governance echo in our modern world? When you look at your own society today, what parts of this historical social contract have we kept, and what parts have we completely abandoned? Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Wise Men's Guide. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.